How's it going, everybody? My name is Tino Ortega, and I will be sharing a speech today to commemorate the life of Stanley Tookie Williams and his achievements. So I'll begin. Mr. Stanley Tookie Williams' impact on society has always been controversial due to the fact that he was nominated for Nobel Peace Prizes while at the same time being a member and a leader of one of the largest gangs in America known as the Crips. And so I'm going to elaborate on the Crips, and I'm going to elaborate on his achievements as I go through the speech. So I'll give you the setting to start off with. It was the mid-1960s. Racism was at an all-time high. Police corruption was well known, and gang violence was spurring out of control. And in the middle of all this was Mr. Stanley Tookie Williams. At the age of 6, he had just moved over from Louisiana with his single mother to South Central LA. Being surrounded by all this, Mr. Stanley Tookie Williams eventually became known as an ambitious and confident young man, and this led him to becoming one of the co-founders of one of the largest gangs in America known as the Crips. But unfortunately in 1979, he was convicted for 4 murders on 2 separate occasions, which were planned robberies, and was sentenced to death. Before being sentenced to death, he spent 24 years in San Quentin prison, death row, which is when he states that he reflected on his life and connected with God. And so a change of heart and mindset was suspected, and I'll elaborate on that, of course. Moving on, Mr. Stanley Tookie Williams, I agree that he wasn't seen as the best person, but we do have to understand where he came from. He had a rough childhood. He had a single mother that worked all day. And so he was out and about ever since the age of 7 by himself, being surrounded by all these negative influences. Can you just imagine being surrounded by that? It just drives you crazy, right? And so Mr. Stanley Tookie Williams saw no other choice but to create his own gang for protection, which eventually became the Crips. And so at that time, he was about 15, and he took over the Crips at the age of 16. So his reputation and the gang reputation put together really gave the Crip gang a big name for themselves. And so this is when massive numbers started to grow, over 20,000 to be exact. And so because of all this massive growth, activity of the gang grew out of control. It even affected Mr. Williams and made him go into drug use and any other petty thefts and robberies and crimes, which eventually led to him being convicted in the year 1979, like I mentioned. All because he was high on drugs. He executed 4 people on 2 different occasions. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection, but while in prison, he was put into solitary confinement because of deadly assaults that he tried to make happen while in prison when he first got in. So he spent 6 years in solitary confinement, and this is when he claims that he connected with God and repented his sins in the eyes of God. And which is why I bring it up, because the change of heart revolves around this idea, is that he recognized his issues and recognized the acceptance of changing himself. Therefore, he went on to write numerous anti-gang books and even gave public service announcements to the general public and schools during the 1990s. And then eventually he became an activist, and he was nominated for Nobel Peace Prizes in the year 2001, 2002, all the way until 2005, every single year. And one notable nomination came from the Swiss Parliament in the year 2001. And I bring up Mr. Stanley Tookie Williams today because I feel like I can relate to this man. Whether he is older or younger than me, I can still relate to him because I feel like we shared similar background and upbringings in this crazy life. And so my experience in the Mission District, I've had my fair share of exposure on gangs, drugs, violence, and police corruption. And so, which is why I have an understanding on why Mr. Williams would act or be involved in a gang. You see, a lot of colored minorities don't don't have people to rely on sometimes. Either their family's working or they simply don't even have a family. And sometimes schools don't even keep track of us. They just give you a grade and just say, all right, get going, right? And so this is why I feel like Mr. Stanley Tookie Williams' life truly made an impact on a lot of us, including myself. And this is why I want to recognize his rights and his wrongs, because without him sharing that, a lot of us would be a whole different person. And as I move on to sharing his rights and wrongs, I do want to mention that I will go in order of his life and achievements, starting with his determination to live and survive. Secondly, being his change of heart. And third, being the impact on the youth. Moving on, I would like to say that Mr. Williams demonstrated that he wanted to survive. And I feel like that's something that we can all agree on, because whether we're scholars or soldiers or simply 9-to-5 workers, we all share the willingness to survive, right? We all want to eat. We all want to make enough money to get by and provide for our beautiful families. And I believe Mr. Williams demonstrated that. Even though he grew up surrounded by violence and racism, that didn't scare him away. Neither did the idea of being on death row. He pushed to have these books published, and he pushed for the idea of connecting with God. He didn't shy away from speaking his mind and taking hours and days on writing these books. And that's just something we should all glorify, because without accepting that, we'll always remain in a hole. We'll never get out, and we're always going to just sink. And so I want to share that because all of that reached out to the public, and he was determined to make an impact, even though he was set to be executed. He knew it was around the corner, but yet he still pushed and pushed and pushed his work out there. And eventually it was published. Over 10 books were written by him regarding life guidance, gang life, and prison life, just so we could all have a better understanding. He shared the good, the bad, and the ugly, whether people believed him or not. And that's something I applaud, because he didn't give up when others gave up on him. And now that I explained his determination and his characteristics, I want to follow up with his change of heart and his mindset, which I believe took a lot in him to admit and accept. Because can you imagine being 20 years old and, you know, running one of the largest gangs in America? It's ridiculous, right? It's like people from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast, they all know you. So all this power just goes to your head. And when it's time to swallow your pride, you choke, because you just can't bear the idea, and it just disgusts you. And so I really want to say that Stanley Tookie Williams really set that great example that you can change your heart, whether people believe in you or not. But he did it. He set aside his pride and stepped down and put his put his face on television, national television, and gave public service announcements to schools and the general public. And he wrote and signed all his writings to show that it was really his work. And I applaud that, because like I said, he was a huge leader in a violent world, and he could be targeted at any moment, but yet he still went on and did what he felt was right. And that just speaks a lot to me, because it takes a lot for a person to accept defeat and admit that they will change because of that defeat. It's like they say, we live and we learn, and he for sure demonstrated that. And so because of all that, he looked out to step down, and he eventually did step down. And then that led to him impacting a lot of our lives, and that includes my life as well. And he shared the knowledge that we needed, that schools couldn't provide. And that takes a lot for somebody to do, because like I mentioned, a lot of people didn't agree or believe in him, and yet he still pushed for his work to get out there. And that takes a lot for a person, and I truly admire that. He reached out to the community, by talking to gang leaders and talking to activists, and even himself becoming an activist. He eventually became successful, and he had the Crips and their opposing gang known as the Bloods come together and call a truce just to better their communities during violent times in 2005. And that just says a lot for a person, because like I said, he was the leader of 20,000 numbers of people, and yet he put all that pride to the side and showed us the good, the bad, and the ugly. He swallowed his pride and he kept his head up high. And that is why I wanted to speak on Stanley Tookie Williams today, because he for sure set the example that it is possible for a change of heart, and it is possible to share your past mistakes to better guide somebody else for their future, you know? And I hope that this has enlightened a lot of you, and now you'll be able to share your past mistakes like I have myself, in order to help a friend or a family member out, because you never know when somebody might need that help, and you could just be that change. Thank you.